Lee and Pam, thank you. I've said that most weeks for the last 10 months, and I have meant it every time. It was beautiful, and thank you especially for that particular piece, which is so meaningful to me and to Elena. It was actually a song that was performed at our wedding, so we love that song so much. I also want to say that on a Sunday when I have already received so much, the reason that we chose, Elena and Thomas and I chose to sing, was because we wanted to offer something back as well. And I will say that I have a greater appreciation for the person who has to direct the carol choir, Pat, because we just had the one, and that's a lot of energy right there. It's a lot of energy. A final Sunday for a pastor with a congregation that he has come to love, as you might expect, is an occasion filled with so many thoughts, so many emotions. It can be a time to look back and reflect on the years that have passed and the ministry that has been undertaken during our partnership. It can be a time to take account of where we are today, you as a congregation and me as a minister. It can be an opportunity to look to the future, an opportunity to dream, recognizing the impact that we have had on one another, and considering how that might send us forth from here. Now, if you've heard me preach before, you'll know that I have a great deal of respect for the past. Our history is the foundation upon which our ministry in the present and our ministry in the future will be built. The values and identity of a congregation should remain solid so that the foundation may be strong. You will also know, however, that I am not one who believes that we should allow ourselves to get stuck in the past, ignoring the realities of our present and the possibilities in our future. For that, my friends, is almost certainly a recipe for stagnation and irrelevance. And far too many churches fall into that trap. So looking back on our time together as pastor and congregation can be informative and reassuring, but it must not be only where we stay. Instead, on an occasion such as this, it is incredibly valuable and true to the nature of a faith tradition that always seeks to be relevant in the present and constantly seeks to discern where God is leading. It is appropriate to spend our energy engaging in ministry that serves the needs of the community today while looking ahead at what will be needed in the weeks, the months, and the years to come. For if we are sincere in our belief that God is still speaking, we must listen for that voice in the past, but also in more than just those echoes to guide our ministry. We must keep listening as well. And to that end, it is a million prayers that encompass all of it, past, present, and future. A million prayers that I leave with you today. This is something the Apostle Paul offered on more than one occasion in our scriptures, an example of which we just heard read by Sylvia. Full disclosure, and I've acknowledged this before, I am not always the biggest fan of the Apostle Paul. There are certainly aspects of his writing or the writing that is attributed to him with which I do not agree. As a 21st century Protestant living in a world where we are taught to question and fact check, it would perhaps be strange for me to agree with everything attributed to Paul. And as an aside, dating back to the early rabbinic movement in Judaism, discussion and debate have always been a core practice in faith communities. And yet there is no questioning, no debating just how much Paul loved the early church communities with which he worked and to whom he wrote. The sincerity in his words of affirmation is evident for all who read his letters, as is the authenticity in the encouraging words he offers to the faithful people in these communities. So this letter to the early Christian community in Ephesus is a prime example, as Paul offers a prayer that they would be filled with the Spirit, with the love of Christ, that they might be, quote, filled with fullness of God. What a beautiful prayer. Again, no matter whether you agree with all of Paul's theological claims or not, you cannot doubt the love he had for the people. Simply put, he wants for them to know God as fully and deeply as they can. And he hopes that that knowledge and experience of God will guide their choices and direct their lives. What else would a faith leader wish for those they had led when they cannot be together or when it comes time for them to depart? And that is where I find myself this morning. One of the things I knew about this congregation at Manhattan Beach Community Church prior to my start as senior minister was that this was a congregation that generally kept a bit of distance from what we might call controversial topics. If you spend any time with me, you know that this is not how I approach church or life in general, for that matter. I believe wholeheartedly that the church must be a place where we come to learn how our faith informs our whole lives. So more than considering only what is happening in our personal lives, when something happens in the world, when there is civil unrest or even insurrection, when we witness acts fueled by racism or sexism or homophobia, when members of a faith community are harassed, or a house of worship of any faith is vandalized or attacked, when the world faces an unprecedented pandemic, no matter what is happening in our lives and in our world, the church and our faith is where we should be able to turn to better understand it, to explore it, find support, and determine how we as people of faith are called to respond. As a result, we embarked in some time of discernment about what it might look like if we met in the middle. The congregation would explore opportunities to delve into some of the important issues facing our community and our world, and I would moderate myself. Shall we say, moderate my overly enthusiastic approach to debating topics that tend to be somewhat controversial or political. I would love to tell you that this was easy for me, but that would not be true. During one period when I was frustrated by some of the pushback I was receiving from some folks based on a sermon I preached on a more challenging subject, I spoke with a trusted lay leader, and I asked her, what should I do? Her response was incredibly wise and deeply faithful. She said, and I quote, "You preach the gospel." And that, my friends, is what I have always tried to do. And I know that as it is with all things in our world, interpretations of what the gospel says will vary, but I continue to believe that should we come to that conversation with open minds and open hearts, sincerely seeking to learn what it is the gospel has to teach us, we will all learn and grow from such an experience. In some way, that is what I believe Paul is praying for on behalf of the people of Ephesus. He is praying that they keep their minds and hearts open to what God has to say to them, individually and collectively. He is encouraging them to listen not only with their ears, but with their hearts. And should they do this, then the ministry which they undertake will be worthy of God and will reflect the purpose for which God has called them. And that, again, is one of a million prayers I have for the congregation here at Manhattan Beach Community Church. Far too often these days we witness people entering the conversation ready, already angry, already prepared to strike back, or already with one foot out the door in anticipation of disengaging and fleeing. Such an approach is counter to the ideal of community that is central to the identity of any faith community, let alone a congregation like the one here at MBCC. How can you expect to be a loving, caring community that offers a welcome that, and I quote, is unconditional, without regard to sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, race, culture, age, national origin, socioeconomic status, family configuration, education, physical and mental challenges, and spiritual and religious traditions? How can you offer that welcome if you are not dedicated to listening to one another and challenging one another to live up to such a lofty statement? I pray that you will continue to find ways to fully and authentically live out this wonderful welcome statement. Or in the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday we celebrate this weekend, to be the beloved community. That, my friends, is one of a million prayers I have for this congregation. And let us not fool ourselves. Every community of faith that claims such an extravagant welcome is challenged to truly embody the words that can be so easily spoken in actions that are not always so easily taken. But knowing the people of MBCC as I do, I offer this prayer with great optimism. For as the song that Thomas and Elena and I sang earlier states, when I close my eyes and when I think about the future for MBCC, I think about what the world could be. A vision of the one you see. A million dreams is all it's going to take. A million dreams for the world you're going to make. And I know deep in my heart that the people here at MBCC are just the dreamers to make that vision a reality in this time and in this place. But if I may be so bold, and heck, this is my last Sunday, so why not? As I pray a million prayers for the community that you will continue to create here at MBCC, and for the world you will help make outside these walls, I also want to tell you about one other prayer I offer. I pray that you will stay true to who you are as a faith community. For there are those who will say that to succeed as a church today, you have to change your approach or fit into some other mold. And I pray that you will have the wisdom, the courage to challenge such assertions, recognizing that the values of welcome and community and love that have been the foundation of this congregation for decades are just as relevant today as they have ever been. And in a culture that seeks to divide us, these values are even more important now. For there are many people looking for just such an experience of community and just such place to be challenged and learn what God is saying in their lives. So I pray that you will listen for God's voice in the midst of the clamoring noise of a culture that may urge you to try and be something else, something you are not. Listen for how God is calling this congregation to be a place of welcome, a place where progressive theology is proclaimed as it has been for more than 5 decades, a place where substance is not set aside, and a place where questions are always welcome. There are so many churches out there and so many different approaches, and simultaneously there are so many people looking for a place to find meaning, to connect with community, and to experience a sense of the presence of God. Do not be afraid to be who you are and to boldly claim it, for that I believe and I pray is just what so many people are looking for these days. So in these last moments serving as your senior minister, I find myself in a reflective and prayerful space, proudly reflecting on the congregation that we have been and the ministries of meaning and impact in which we have engaged, and those in which the congregation of MBCC has engaged for more than 100 years, praying that all of you can experience that same sense of pride. Intently reflecting on the congregation that you are today and the ministries of mission, formation, fellowship, and welcome that embody the values of this congregation, this community of faith, and how they are meeting the needs of this community and the wider world. Praying that all of you recognize the amazing ministry being done and feel called to find where you and your gifts fit in. And hopefully reflecting on a future filled with unbounded potential as you listen for how God is calling you to live out your values and respond to the fullness of God with which you continue to be filled. Praying that all of you will embrace the opportunity starting this MLK weekend to dream like that great prophet of a better world you will be a part of making here in the South Bay and far beyond. A million dreams, a million prayers is all it's going to take. Please know that mine will always be among them. Amen.